All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning, good morning.
Say hi to the cameras here as well. Um, Excellent. All right. Well, we were thinking that we might do this as a fireside chat slash podcast versus podcaster.
What you could say a podcast is kind of like a fireside chat, maybe.
I would say, well, it depends on which one. If it's the one where you're eating hot sauce
Minus the
while being
fire.
interviewed,
Yeah.
it's literally fire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anywho, all right.
Sure. So yeah, we're gonna do a little conversation here, and we're gonna talk a little bit about how we got into podcasting and kind of what we've learned from that a little bit from a marketing perspective, also some of the insights that we've kind of gained from all these conversations that we've had. I shared a little bit yesterday, but we'll go a little deeper today. But yeah, you wanna kick it off? You want me to
Sure,
kick it off?
sure. Um,
All right, good,
so
good.
whenever I talk with people in warehousing and in fulfillment and 3PL and distribution, I talk about you 90% of the time. I'm talking to those people, and I say, if you haven't already heard or know about Kevin Lawton, then where have you been? So I think this is a great opportunity. Then, so we should like maybe start from scratch a little bit,
Sure,
and
yeah.
and talk about like kind of just the origin story a little bit. Um, and that's what I do on my podcast. Is I try to learn a little bit more and uncover the story of the human and the person behind the business or behind the company or the brand. So maybe kind of like start us from zero or one. So we know about
0.
you.
When
Yeah.
I was 0?
Hmm.
Yeah. No. So yeah, so I told a story to a couple people here over the course of the last 2 days, but I started in the warehousing industry. Was not my intention, right? I guess maybe show of hands, who here grew up wanting to work in the warehousing industry? What? So obviously the same as you. That was not my fantasy for my dream career, right? But I found myself after school, didn't quite know what I wanted to do, and actually went to school, majored in entrepreneurial studies, and I minored in event planning and arts administration. So very far from supply chain, right? Um, and I ended up getting a job as a contract as a inventory control specialist, and that was kind of my first exposure to the warehouse, and I was pretty good at it. Started to like it, and then it kind of grew from there, and quickly got hired on full time by that company, which was a book distributor back in New Jersey, and that gave me my first exposure to kind of the warehouse and what happens in there, and quickly got involved in Manhattan WMS upgrade, which was just wild to me at the time that something like that was taking place, and it was taking so long to do. And then continued to grow that and be in various roles. Worked for Keurig Dr. Pepper for a while as well, helping to audit their 3PL partners. Went through 3PL transitions with them, went through system transitions with them, opening new buildings, and then started to work for some smaller companies doing similar things, doing these new building openings. And who here has ever opened a new warehouse? Do you think it's a lot of fun? No, right, right. So, but you learn a lot very quickly, right? So I guess I think I maybe did 5 or 6 in my career, right, in like a 4-year period. So learned a lot about the industry through doing that, and that kind of pulled me in. And I had this boss who I started working with at Keurig, and then we worked together at 3 different companies. He kept bringing me along. He kept like pulling me into the warehouse, and there was one point I remember where I almost shifted to transportation because I
Oh,
had a job offer to do something. And he was like, no, no, come see this new building I'm getting started in. And yeah, so I guess you can guess how that ended up. But at some point I wanted to learn more about the industry, and I wanted to dive a little deeper, and I was looking for things that were interesting to learn from. And being younger at the time, uh, there was not too much that was very interesting to learn from. that I thought was grabbed my attention, that I could pay attention to long enough to get some information and learn about other things in the industry. And so at first I was going to start a blog and I was trying to write, and then I was in the middle of doing one of these new facilities, and we were putting in like a Dematic multi-shuttle system, voice picking, GDP pick stations, going from paper picking. So it was a little big leap, right, in a couple months. So so I quickly realized, like, I don't have any time to write, right? Sit down and write and edit. And that same boss was like, "Oh, I heard her podcasts are becoming a thing. Like, maybe you should do a podcast." And so I thought that was easier, just sit down and talk, basically, right? And I don't have to do too much editing. And that's kind of how it started. And it just, ended up being conversations with people in the industry. And I was just looking to learn from them. And then I found out about this thing called ProMat, right? And like I started it, I think the first episode came out in March 2019. And somebody I was talking to and trying to get guests on was like, "Oh, are you going to ProMat?" And I kind of was playing it cool. I'm like, because I didn't know what ProMat was. And I was like, I'm thinking about it. And like, get off the call and quickly Google like ProMat. I'm like, oh my God, like, yeah, this is where I need to be. So figured out how to get there, and I just bought a little handheld recorder and I just ran around like for 3 days there. And I think I did like 40 interviews or something like in 3 days. Just, will you do an interview with me? Will you do an interview with me? Will you do an interview? And some people are like, no, what is this? Right. Um, but from that, then it kind of just started to snowball and get more traction. And I really didn't think about it long term. Like, what will this be, or what will it do? It was kind of like a creative project, creative outlet from all this other stuff I was doing. And I guess it resonated and has grown and built up over time. And now, now it's about like 6.5 years since the first episode, and we got 600 some episodes out there. So you don't have to listen to them all, but there's probably something there for you, hopefully. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. And it's led to tons of opportunities to be able to do interesting things in the industry, like this, like come to events like this. And thank you to IWLA for having us as speakers and be able to share knowledge. And I can say that, I accomplished that goal of learning more about the industry. And now I'm able to also help other people learn about the industry, which I think is very rewarding for me. Yeah. But what about you? How'd you start?
Well, I am one of those people that signed up and wanted to go into logistics. I've been on some podcasts, I've been interviewed, and a lot of people are quite surprised to hear that, oh, you have a degree in logistics and supply chain.
Yeah.
So no, I did intend to do this one day, maybe not necessarily on stage with microphones and stuff, because I, like everyone else, started on the warehouse floor and whatnot. But if we back up, when in my degree program, I had to have an internship. You had to have a paid internship in order to graduate. As part of it was like a course. So that was Siva Logistics, and I did some 5S projects, helped create a YMS for a new warehouse they just built there on the DFW airport property, and did some other stuff with Siva. Then a professor said, hey, the folks at PepsiCo are hiring, and you get all the free like Mountain Dew and chips that you want. And I was like,
sold, yeah.
Sign me up. So hopped over to PepsiCo for a second internship. One of the pieces of advice I heard from teachers and folks was do as many internships as you can, because it's like trying on shoes before you buy one. Like you want to do as many of these as you can. So at PepsiCo, I was measuring the carbon footprint of all of the business units of all of PepsiCo. This was back when the Smart Away program was just launching. And I got to be now the guy calling JB Hunt and Schneider and stuff and saying, how many trucks are in your fleet? What's the carbon footprint of each one of those trucks? And how many miles are you running for us? And calculating what that footprint was. I had to go learn Access database, because obviously they did more than 200,000 shipments. So I had to go learn how to go calculate the footprint of millions of movements, and it turned out to be more than some countries, carbon footprints, right? So anyway, so that was that. And then the economy was in the toilet at the time. That was 2009. And they said, we've got a hiring freeze. If you can go find a real job, good luck. But otherwise, you can stay an intern indefinitely until this hiring freeze lifts. And so that kicked me down a path of 3PL land. Because the company that would hire me was called Crane Worldwide. Is the guy from Crane here today? No?
Oscar.
Okay. Yeah, he was on the boat last night. We talked for a bit. So I was at Crane for a bit. Did ocean and air imports, ran a little operation in the warehouse, and then was part of the Harley Davidson distribution startup whenever they started distributing Harley Davidsons. Did that for a bit. Then a boss that I had there moved to Main Freight and started the warehousing and distribution division here in the U.S. And he remembered the kick-ass PowerPoints and slides and Excel spreadsheets I did for him. So he pulled me over to Main Freight, kind of similar.
Yeah.
And so I was the second person in that organization to help start up the warehousing and distribution operations for them in the U.S. And so I got to travel around and go help open up facilities as well. Again, a new facility opening it's rough,
It's so
Um,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the term happy hour came from, I think. And then did that for a bit, and got to see a lot of things. The really cool thing I think about P&L, and I think the thing P&L Main Freight, that I think is a really cool lesson for everyone in here is that as a branch manager, which I kind of got quickly to be, is I had full P&L responsibility at like 25 years old. So I got to build the building, hire all the people, design all the racks, go get all the customers, decide what color to paint all the walls, everything. And by doing that, I called it having my own little lemonade stand, because I got like full carte blanche, like ability to do what I wanted. As long as the P&L, every month, and actually we actually did invoicing every week. So we knew exactly what our P&L was and how profitable we were every week. Anyway, but that allowed me to have so much responsibility and like scope of responsibility so early on. So that was, and if you can implement something like that in your business, I think that's really helpful to help grow those leaders and let them see what it's like to be an entrepreneur of sorts. When you've got to run your own building, run your own P&L. So from there, I had an opportunity to get out of 3PL land. So I was in 3PL land for like 10 years. And at the time, I was the president of CSCMP in Dallas, and I had just organized a tour of the Texas Instruments fab there. And I was at a CSCMP. I was having lunch, kind of like we all have lunch today, except I was kind of junior and hanging out with a guy from TI. I was like, man, that tour of TI was really cool the other day.
Mm.
You think there'd be anything over there of interest for me that could be kind of fun? I'm looking for maybe to do something different. And I always remember he was like, oh, Nathan, whatever students you want to send my way, just give them my information and I'll help them look for a job and get them set up here at TI. And I was like, no, Philippe, I'm talking about myself. And he's like, oh, he was a French guy. And so I'm not going to try to impersonate. But anyway, so that was like one of my first or second learning experiences of it's your network and the volunteering and what you do in organizations that really helps open doors and allow you to have that career kind of flexibility and options. The idea is like you need to be networking and networked before you need a network. So do that ahead of time. And then when you need it or want to leverage that network, it's there for you, right? All right. I have a lot of these. Okay. So there was Texas Instruments. So I got to run some of their facilities here. The fun story, since you mentioned ProMat, earlier in my days, I was in Chicago at the time that ProMat was happening, and I heard it's a big free conference and lots of shiny objects in there. So this was, again, 10 years ago. Walked in, saw all the cool stuff. Roy, you're like, this one's sort of like, I walked in and there was an auto store there on the floor. And I was like just mesmerized by this thing. I grew up in the country on the farm, right? So I was like, this is wicked crazy. What kind of companies could possibly like afford to put this kind of thing in their warehouse? Is mind blowing. And then if you like fast forwarded like 5, 6, 7 years later, I'm at Texas Instruments running their North American distribution center, and there's a big old auto store in there. And so I got to like kind of see this full loop of seeing something at ProMat, thinking, wow, that's a crazy whiz bang thing, to then running and managing a facility with that technology, right?
Nice.
The full cycle. So did that for a bit. Then I got to had an opportunity to go run to the Silicon Valley tech startup doing autonomous trucks. And so got to dabble in vehicles and trucks and things for a bit and try to figure out how to make a 26-foot box truck drive down the road without a driver behind the wheel. So did that for a bit. And after that, I was like, I think I'm ready to jump out on my own and try to do something on my own. Even though I didn't have entrepreneurship classes, I've always had that entrepreneurship itch.
Mm.
You just kind of know, right? I like to color outside the lines a lot. Um, so did some consulting while I tried to figure out what was happening. And then I got bored, as I do, and grabbed a camera, that one right there. And I was like, I'm going to go shoot some YouTube videos in warehouses and stuff. Because what I realized is a lot of folks don't get an opportunity to go on facility tours, go check out things with their local transportation clubs or CSCPs or IWLAs or whatnot. So I was like, I will go and film and create this content and bring it to them on YouTube so they can sit on the toilet and watch it. And it takes no effort. And keep it easy, right? To educate, right? And share. And then I realized that all like the cool people in the industry all had podcasts. I was like, I should do that. It's much easier editing than video. So you were a big part of that, right? And I was also on Everything is Logistics with Blythe.
Sure.
And that was my very first podcast to be a guest on. And she mentioned something about there needing to be more content creators, that there's plenty of room out there for more voices in logistics and supply chain. At the time, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. But at some point, it started to like just eat at me a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, I already have a camera. And then I guess maybe I can get a microphone. And so that started the podcast sort of journey. And the funny story is it only took about 10 podcast episodes to then be introduced at things as the podcast guy. So for any of y'all like looking at this, it only takes 10 or so before you are a renowned specialist in podcasting. And then from that, I kind of like realized that my name was Nathan Chaney. I kind of came up with this name, Supply Chaney. And I was like, I think this is maybe starting to be in the direction I was supposed to be going my whole life. And I think from the marketing perspective and for everyone here, I think one of the big turning points was figuring out what the heck my mission statement was, what I'm all about, what my purpose is. And once I came up with that, everything else started to fall in place and make sense. And so that mission statement was to be a creative, connected, and capable supply chain resource. And I think that at the end of the day, creativity is really what wins the day, right? And so once I had that, then I started coming up with more ideas of how do I go be a creative, connected, and capable supply chain resource. So one of those early things was a calendar of events where I was like, all these different organizations all have different calendars. They all have different schedules for when their happy hours are and their tours are. I want to bring them all together. So I did that sort of thing. Then I was like, well, all these groups are meeting and I love talking to people. I don't know if you could tell. Love talking to people, love having drinks and that sort of thing. So I was like, I started this thing called the Supply Chain Social Club because during COVID, everyone was doing everything online, all these like virtual networking things, right? And then when COVID was done, everyone went to back in person, like what we had on Wednesday night. And I was like, well, I'm going to go be the virtual networking guy at least then. So started that. And then of course you were like one of the first people I talked to. And I was like,
Yeah.
I think the way that I can grow this is I need to partner with people that have communities and people that have a one-way kind of like maybe monologue to their audience. And maybe through what I'm doing, I can help make that a dialogue between folks that have a voice and a community and their community. So that's really kind of what kickstarted and got the Supply Chain Social Club going. And since then, I'm just on this path to continue to try to meet this mission of, just bringing value into the supply chain. And you said freight a while ago. I have a freight brokerage business as well. And so I've got that piece. So I can speak freight as well as warehousing a bit. But anyway, so I just finished my MBA the other day. Did you, I didn't say that because of that, but I say because
Congratulations.
because
Yeah.
did you bring up being a teacher as part of your day job?
I
No.
didn't. No, I also teach. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an adjunct. So funny enough, when I went to my school, college, supply chain as a major was not a a thing, or it was a brand new program. So the year I graduated was the first year they had people that were majored in supply chain from
Mm,
my university, and now I'm an adjunct professor at that university teaching supply chain. So
that's cool.
yeah, so which is a lot of fun. And it's very interesting to see how the students view supply chain now. And I started teaching there in 2021, and it was the first semester that they were back in person from COVID. So it's very interesting to see since that semester to now, like the awareness and recognizing what supply chain is and why they're interested in supply chain. And in the beginning, it was a lot of oh, my dad works in supply chain. He told me I should major in supply chain, right? And now it's like, well, I'm interested in supply chain because it's moving all these different pieces, and like I'm actually really interested in transportation because I like the movement of these things, and it's a lot deeper answers and a deeper understanding from the youth, I guess. Now, being able to do that. But I wanted to say something there because I think there's something interesting in what Nathan said, and kind of his journey as well, where if you think about the people that work for you, right, and those leaders, and this was kind of a realization I had as well as I was starting my podcast, was that as leaders in the warehouse, supervisors, managers, it you have limited exposure to what's outside of your operation in many times, right? And unless like you are a curious person, as we kind of were, right, and took that extra step, right? But the average or typical leader in that operation setting is not one that's necessarily going to go spend like their off hours researching about the latest WMS or something like that, unless their boss is like, hey, we need to look at a new WMS, right? Then maybe they're going to spend some time doing that. So you as, 3PL leaders and owners in here, I mean, I think there's opportunity for you to invest in those leaders to be able to give them the opportunity to go to events, and maybe some of you do. I'm not saying you don't, but to go to like a ProMat or a Modex and just see what is possible out there, right? And how do you get them to be able to get exposure to those types of things? Because as I started to do the podcast and I started to learn more about the technology and the different solutions that were out there, I kind of realized that in the position that I was in at that time, I'm like, oh, if my company like was not going to be working on a certain project, like I would probably never even know that some of these solutions existed, right? So I would say to take that back and think about how can you give more exposure to those people to get them thinking in a different way, right? Because there may be a challenge that they have that they don't even realize there's a solution out there for it because they just don't know how to get to it or discover it. And that's been like a big mission of mine, is to be able to increase that discovery. So you could tell them to listen to the podcast maybe, but get them to go out to these conferences and give them opportunities to learn and get more hooked on operations and continuous improvement and things like that. Yeah.
I think one of the fun things and a piece of advice I give a lot is, um, especially a supervisor or first time manager to ever go to any kind of expo and see all the solutions, see all the software, see all the gadgets and trinkets and robots and everything, is even though they may have a problem at that point in time that they're trying to go solve, but they've never been in this environment. So it's going to take a minute for it to all just soak in. But kind of like leaning back on that store story, is there's so many things that I've seen 3 years ago walking a floor that I just have a problem today.
Mm.
And I remember this one, and then of course we've all had that moment. You go back to your phone, you're like, I took a picture of this thing, and that's it. I need to go call them up. So I think that's like maybe enlightening for those of you all on the sales side, is that maybe you're trying to target, try to have a conversation with someone today. It may not be today that deal closes, but you may be able to plant that seed,
Yeah.
that problem and the use case really comes to fruition later. And as long as you left a good impression on them and whatnot, then you should be like the first one that they're going to call up. But that planting seeds concept is something that I've carried through in a lot of what I've been doing, which is a lot of what we're trying to do, right? Is just plant seeds for warehousing and for logistics. Um, I've got one question for you. So you're at
Okay.
episode 600 something. Again, when I talk to people about you, I say he's the most prolific warehouse podcaster ever. So one question for you would be like, what is like kind of the secret? Is there a secret to that longevity? Because I think if you like read the statistics, the average podcast has like 5 episodes before they like close the doors. So 600, like that's amazing. So any sort of like tips or insights there?
Um, no, I mean, it's probably the most committed I've ever been in my life. But just consistency, right? And I think that, um, it was something that, and certainly, there's been times where I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm sure we all get those points, like whenever we work on and just like, do I really want to do this or work on this? And, but I think that, the more it gets out there and then the more like feedback I get from people and, and probably the biggest piece of feedback, which kind of motivates me to keep going is people that I've met in person that listen to the podcasts and they have come from a different industry. They've come into warehousing, like they found my podcast and that's how they learned about the industry. Right. So that makes me feel like it's valuable in a sense. Right. So, but I think the key is consistency. Definitely. Like when I started early on, and I was trying to learn about So actually, when I started the podcast, I had never listened to a podcast before. So it was like brand new world to me, right? And I got lucky by happenstance that I had a young son at the time, and he just didn't understand that like, hey, I'm going to be in the basement recording. You can't run around upstairs, right? Because it's noisy. So I had to get a little co-working space close by in my town, and it just happened that this guy who had been podcasting for many years was also working out of there. So he kind of showed me the ropes and told me all these things. And one of the things was about just being consistent, right? To grow the audience and do that. And so just learning to kind of put in those reps and, put an episode out once a week and on the same time, same day, every week, just continue to do that. And I guess over time it just became kind of habit. And then, yeah, learn to, and I think this is probably a good takeaway for you all from like a marketing perspective and a creative perspective, right? Because we want to be out there, right? And social media and things like that are so important in the marketing world today to create that awareness about what you're doing and all those different things, right? So one big kind of unlock there, um, that I was able to eventually get the luxury of time to have was to be able to just batch content, right? So I'll take one day and I'll do 5 or 6 podcasts like in that day, right? And so right now, at a minimum, we're putting out like 8 podcasts a month, like two a week, right? So I'll take like one week, maybe every other month, then I'll take 2 of days and I'll do like 12 podcasts or something like that. So like next week I'm gonna record I think like 11 total, and that'll give us episodes through November probably, right? So getting ahead on that and kind of batching things then allowed me to start to focus on other parts of it, right? Like how do we distribute it better? How do we get it back out into the audience? How do I find time to come to conferences like this and, be present and network and not worry about like running back to the hotel because I got to get a podcast out tomorrow morning, right? So figuring that out and trying to unlock that, I think, was a big factor in being able to stay so consistent and so committed. So yeah, that's what I would say, and I would recommend that too. I mean, I think that for you as businesses, whether you're a solution provider or 3PL here, you know, being able to batch a lot of that content for social media and things like that can be a big big thing for you? Like if you have somebody, just sit down and talk, like you could just do like an internal podcast, right? Have somebody on your sales team or leader or something like that, just talk and just record it. You can take a bunch of stuff out of that, right? You could take little clips, you could take texts, you could create so many things. Like I think, the one thing about a podcast is it's a long form piece of content, right? But in that long form piece of content, there's probably at least 5 other pieces of content that you can create, right? There's ideas that naturally come up in conversation, and you could pull on that idea string and create a blog post, right? You could pull on that idea string, create some kind of resource for the industry, right? So there's a lot of things that stem from these conversations. And if you think about conversations just you've had in the last day here at this forum, right? I mean, there's a ton of content there. I mean, I got like a list of notes I'm writing down. I'm like, oh, this is like a good LinkedIn post. This is a good, social post. Or this is a good podcast topic, right? So when you think about these conversations you're naturally having while you're out and about, they're valuable to you. They're probably valuable to somebody else as well. So I kind of went off of your question, but yeah, what are your thoughts?
One, I appreciate how when you talk about, well, I did it, I was like hand to mouth with podcast episodes at first, and then I learned about batch picking, no, batching, right?
We know about batch picking too.
Yeah. So, and I did that on purpose because
Yeah.
I think the fun thing maybe about us and maybe other folks that are content creators in the logistics and supply chain space that are logisticians is that we take an operational approach to it, right? It's
Or
like,
very like
you
process oriented.
run
Yeah.
our content
Yeah.
farms like we do a warehouse or a manufacturing facility. So, and at the end of the day, even though it's marketing and it's an art and it's science and all that sort of stuff, at the end of the day, I think that every business is a supply chain business and is a logistics business because you've got inputs, you've got some processing in the middle, and you've got outputs, right? And so I think content and marketing and a podcast is not much different. One thing that I've talked to a few folks here today who are here or over the last couple of days have mentioned that they as a company have had this idea of having a podcast that they want to launch. But basically, one of the questions is like, should we as a company have our own podcast? And like, is there someone that can help us launch our own, ABC 3PL podcast and whatnot? Or what I kind of sometimes mention to those folks is rather than trying to go on your own and start one that's your own brand and you got your own head of marketing sort of being the MC and stuff is an easy like baby step is just sponsor somebody else on their podcast. And then therefore you've got your name attached with someone who is creating content. As long as you like their style and their approach resonates with you and your company and will present and represent your brand well. Another way is just to get your folks that are in your business on other people's podcasts, like your guests or my guests, is a way also like to get those baby steps going. And that was actually, you said when you had when you had the idea to have a podcast, you never listened to one before.
Yeah.
Mind blowing. So for me, I went into it knowing I think this is a thing I want to do. So I intentionally went about getting myself to be a guest on other people's podcasts, so that I could see how the sausage was made and what it was like to be a guest first. So then I could kind of figure out how can I reverse engineer this and then be on the other side of the microphone and be more prepared for that, And so I went in it kind of as eyes open as I could, with intent on how to go do it. Obviously, still figuring out, what the secret sauce is and what the thing is. And what I'm finding is that it's not so much about the conversation that's being had at the moment and all that sort of stuff. I view my podcast as, I call them typically, and anyone I've talked to in here, I call it like a date with that person that I'm talking to on the other side.
Are we on a date right now?
Well, it's not Facebook official yet, but
paying for this date?
so, but for me, it's a great conversation starter. And if that person on the other side of the microphone is not someone I know or I've met or I'm very familiar with, it's a first coffee chat that just happens to be happening with a microphone and a camera on. And I think from a brand perspective and from a marketing perspective for companies, this is, and I've heard multiple companies use and leverage their podcast in this way of, it's a conversation starter. It's a get to know you, kind of get the warm fuzzy feelings going with maybe with a prospective customer or whatnot that you can bring on. And it just gives you another touch point and a way to kind of get to know them better. That can help just start to kind of like peel back some layers, that maybe are up between you and building that relationship to the next step. So I was going to ask your advice though for
Sure.
folks that are thinking about launching their own podcast in their own company, or doing something else. Like any advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is kind of underestimated is like the work it takes to put a podcast out, right? And I think I kind of underestimated too, and maybe I said that in the beginning, like I just thought, oh, just sit down and talk on the microphone, right? But if you want to create something that's gonna get out there, right? I mean, it's easy to sit down and talk, but it's a lot of work to get it out there, right? And grow the audience. And for you, your target is going to be to get to potential clients, right? And like, how do you get in those arenas? How do you get in those channels where they're going to discover you in the first place, and then spend a decent amount of time with you as a podcast, right? So, and I think that we all know like there's a ton of content out there, right? So you have to kind of stand out to do it, right? So creating your own podcasts for your company, I think can be effective, but it is a lot of work to do so, right? And I think where you can leverage the podcast effectively is kind of what I said before. Like you create a podcast, and then how do you create a bunch of other content based off of that, right? And then that helps to increase that reach and potential digestion of the content, right? Because some people don't listen to podcasts, right? Some people like to read instead, right? So you can pull a lot of different things out there. But I will say that I hear a lot like, oh, we're going to do a podcast, but it's going to be different. We're just going to sit down and we're just going to talk, right? Don't do that. Just, you got to find a focus, right? So we talked about yesterday, in my talk, right? Finding that specialization, right? So if you define like, what do you want to hone in on? What do you want to specialize in as a 3PL? Like create a podcast around that topic, right? Like we're going to do, e-commerce fulfillment specifically for subscription boxes, right? Let's make I don't know, subscribe podcast or something like that. But focus on that, right? And focus on educating, right? Like Aaron talked about yesterday, the different type of people, right? That are going to be looking for the 3PL. I always think when I'm interviewing somebody, I always think that the person listening doesn't know anything that we're talking about, right? So I take it to the basic level, right? If they're using an acronym or something, like, clarify that, like, what is that, right? So take that opportunity to kind of educate, right? And make sure that it's getting out there in that way. And, think about how can you, and you don't always have to have a guest either, right? You could just create a podcast that's just you or someone in your company just talking about these different topics, right? Um, but that starts to create that kind of domain expertise, right? And then when people start to search for these types of things, right? Like how do I find, like, maybe you do a podcast episode, let's go with the idea of the subscription boxes, right? Like what are the best custom packaging suppliers, right? And maybe you have a podcast episode that talks about, here are like top 5 packaging suppliers that do customization, and then you dive into like why you prefer them as a vendor, and working with them and talking about the selection of all those things, right? Like that's gonna come up and resonate in search results, right? And that's gonna help position you as an authority, right? Somebody looking for that then is maybe like, oh, well, I need a 3PL to do subscription boxes for me. So maybe I'll contact these guys. They know what they're talking about. Seems like, right? So that would be my advice if you want to do your own podcast. But I think the podcast guesting strategy is a little bit of an easier lift, right? If you have a smaller team, smaller marketing team, to be able to get a leader in your 3PL to be positioned on podcasts, right? And talk about what you do. And I think when you go for that guesting strategy, you want to think the same, right? Like, who am I trying to target, right? Like I love to have 3PLs on my podcast, right? But is my audience a bunch of e-commerce brands looking for a 3PL? Probably a small percentage, right? It's more people in operations that want to learn about other operations, right? So we'd love to have you on, sure. But, I would look for these podcasts, or whether it's podcasts or live streams or different types of creators that are going to be reaching that target audience, right? And like, how do you educate them about, what goes on behind the scenes, or how do you, have better packaging, or that brand experience, and things of that nature. And I think that brands are looking for 3PLs, especially on the e-commerce side, that can speak that language too, right? That content language. Does anybody here do fulfillment for like TikTok Shop? Good, right? So on TikTok, right, we can do TikTok Shop, and they have these TikTok lives, right? So I've seen 3PLs where they're leveraging that. They have we have a mutual friend. I don't know if does anybody know Deliver Zen in Dallas, right? So Drew, who's the owner of Deliver Zen, he's invested like heavily in content. They just moved into a new warehouse. They set up, I think you were there. They set up like a little studio in there. But they actually have like their brands come into the warehouse, and they'll do like a TikTok live in the warehouse, like doing like giveaways and packing orders live, like showing the audience and things like that. And I've seen uh, a company called Bear Performance Nutrition, BPN, and I think they do self fulfillment. But I saw one time they were doing a live, right? And they're like, oh, put your order number in the comments, right? So put the order number in the comments. And so they would like grab order numbers that they would see, and we're like, oh, we're going to pack that order right now. And so like the customer could see their order getting packed, and they're like, oh, and we're going to throw in this free item there, right? So when you start to understand that, right, we talked a little bit about yesterday, like how do you drive additional value for your customer, right? When you start to understand like that content piece, and you're able to give them like another channel to get out there and do those things and be creative, that can help drive more value and more volume for them, and for you, right, too. But as you start to get out there, like think about, where do the brands that you want to attract live? And then like, where do their customers live as well? And how can you collaborate with them in some sort of way, right? You probably have brands right now that I'm sure have social media presence, right? So, maybe talk to them and ask them, how can we do something together? Like, you want to come in the warehouse and do some content with us, like show your customers how orders get packed, and, hopefully they give you like a shout out, right? And they know other e-commerce brands, so other e-commerce brands are going to see that. So yeah, I mean, I think that, could you start your own podcast? Yeah, probably, but there's probably a lot of other ways, I think, to get content out there in a lighter lift initially, right? And figure out what direction. And if you do shorter kind of hits of content like that. You can find like what resonates, and then grab onto that, right? And focus on that like going forward. And then you can expand on that. And then maybe it comes into a long form type of thing. But yeah, I think that would be my advice. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, so we talk to a lot of companies
Sure.
from the whole spectrum, and I think so. We have a unique like front row seat to the marketing machine that is these companies. And again, we wanted to kind of like focus a little bit on marketing here today. So I was going to see if you could like maybe share a couple of easy, low hanging fruit do's for folks in here, marketing wise, and then maybe or maybe some don'ts, some things, some marketing tactics and things that are maybe something a little bit old school, not really that effective that from what we can see out there. Yeah, so like do's and don'ts in marketing for either solutions providers
Mm.
or the operators.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe I just gave you some dues, right? But I would say that, your people in your organization need to have a presence out there, right? I mean, I think that more and more the brand forward social media page is kind of is not getting as much traction, right? So like people that are part of your company, like they need to be a personality from the company, right? And that could be like a founder or CEO, or it could be like a VP of ops, right? But like you have to figure out who are those people and who do you want to push out there. And I guess who is comfortable doing that as well, right? And um, I think that's one thing for sure. And I think, a big thing is I see like a lot of times, right? Because as Nathan said, like we interview a lot of different companies, right? And when the podcast goes live, like we're putting it out there, we're tagging the company, tagging the person, and then like they're not taking that sometimes and like doing as much as they could with it, right? Like the company can respond, leave a comment, right? The company can reshare it, repost it. I mean, multiple times they could, right? Um, and the person too as well, and like expand upon it, right? So how do you take that opportunity and how do you go deeper, right? So you want to be, and then I would say another layer is you want to be a part of the conversation, right? And being a part of the conversation is not leaving a comment saying like, you know, oh, if you ever need 3PL services, here's my email, right? That's not good, right? Don't pitch in the comment, right? Just you need to establish that you know what you're doing, right? Like here's my expertise. And so when you're commenting on these posts and leaving them messages, etc., there should be like no pitch in it at all, right? If you're gonna say something interesting and compelling, then like they'll go to your profile and they'll see what you do, and if they need your services, they'll come to you. But the more you show up, right, the more you'll be seen, the more you'll be visible, being able to do that, right? Like I just mentioned, our friend Drew at Delivers Zen, and if I think about like who's doing a lot of content at 3PL, like I immediately think of Drew because it's all over like the feed, right?
Yeah.
And there's certain people like I know that I'm always going to see that they're leaving comments and stuff, and they're going to be like a part of the conversation, right? And it's effective for them, right? They get positioned as like, um, we have another friend, Drew.
Another Drew.
Yeah, different Drew. But he's like a integrator for automation and robotics and stuff like that. And he's always commenting, always leaving things, but he's never pitching, right? He's just adding his thoughts, what he thinks about the solution, what he thinks about that. But a lot of people are like, oh, he's the automation guy, right? Just naturally because he's always in the conversation. So I would say that certainly get comfortable with like putting thoughts out there and what you think on certain topics. Like I would say from a 3PL perspective, one thing I've seen multiple times over the last, well, I guess this year with tariffs and all those things, right? As soon as there's like some news about de minimis going away or something like that, which it sounds like is real this time, I think. What do you guys think is real this time? I don't know. It's supposed to be done at the 29th, right? So the thing I see like immediately is like de minimis is dead. We're a 3PL located at blah, 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 blah. So if you need services immediately, like we can be your provider, right? And it's like copy and paste like 100 times. Like 3PL is posting the same kind of thing. Like, but the tact that I would take there differently is like talk about, just say like, don't say like, hey, we're a 3PL if you need help with whatever is going on, tariff situation, this and that. Um, Say more like, give the news, right? And then say like something like, well, what does this mean for your brand, right? And how can you navigate this or prepare? And then just give some bullet points, right? Like, this is it, right? Okay. Just useful information. Yeah. Right. I say lean more towards like the thought leader side, right? Because I think the thing is, going back to like showing up, being a part of the conversation, like if you're providing useful information, people will just know what you do, right? If you're just showing up just to pitch and pitch and pitch, people will be like, "Oh, that's the pitch guy, right? I know what he does, but I don't want to talk to him. He just pitches to me." But no, I think how do you navigate that and kind of do that? I mean, yes, like people are using AI, right, to do these things, but I think that, and I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I mean, if you have a thought, right, that you want to put out there, like it's okay to use AI as a tool to help develop that, but you want to make sure that it's in your language, right? Like how would you speak about this, right? And what do you think about this? And uh, I think they say like one of the tells of AI, right, is the M dash, right? Or even I think like the all the emojis and things like that, right? So take some time to maybe clean that up a little bit and make it a little better. But I think lean towards the thought leadership side and as things pop up, it could be in conversations like, things like this, or just like in conversations with your client. Like you could say, great posts that I see like from a 3PL perspective is like, oh, I had a client the other day that had problem X, right? And so we worked together and came up with solution Y, right? That's useful to people because it's something that actually happened, right? So using like those kind of experiences, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the overuse of AI for everything is almost the same as pitch slapping all the time. It's just like it's very inauthentic. So maybe a quick hack, like hybrid solution, is get AI to give you the speaking points, or make sure you kind of cover the 3 big points that I want to make, but just the outline, and then have a human fill in and write it in the natural speaking language of your brand and your company. So you let it do the high level, here's the 3 big points, but then you word it the right way that feels right for your audience and for your company, right? So get the best of both worlds, something like that. But we're in the last minute here. One thing that I'll do just real quick is we've been talking a lot here about like the tactical surface level sort of marketing stuff. And I think it's a real treat that we're going to have Kara up in a little bit. And she's going to speak about like the science and math and like crazy cool marketing stuff that I always thought marketing was just like, I'm an operations guy, right? So I've always thought
Yeah.
marketing is like a logo and a business card and some brochures and showing up at a trade show. There's so much more to it. And I think the cool thing is that Kara's been on both of our podcasts.
Yeah.
So for anyone who doesn't, isn't able to stay the whole time to hear her speak, whatnot, you can hear the rest of the story on one of our podcasts with her. So
Sure.
anyway, well, thank you all for your time and attention and whatnot. And yeah, good stuff.